I wrote a paper quite a while ago called The Precarious Fiscal Foundations of EMU, much of which is relevant to the discussion today. That paper was about the intertwining of fiscal and monetary policy, a theme on which both Tom and I have worked over the years, and just trying to bring out the implications of the fact that the euro was founded with a central bank, but with no unified fiscal authority capable of issuing bonds and and imposing taxes on its own. And that made it extremely unusual and raised questions about what would happen when the need for fiscal monetary coordination arose. And it certainly has arisen. My view is that if the euro is to survive, it will have to work out, the euro area will have to work out a way to share fiscal burdens and connect fiscal authority to the ECB in the role of lender of last resort. Right now, none of those connections are clear, and if those connections remain unclear, or people try to go back to a system in which there is, in fact, no central fiscal backing for the ECB, I think the prospects for the euro are dim.
So I'm going to repeat the same theme, just give you an example. United States, at the founding of our republic, after our second revolution, which is the one that the Constitution was written. So here's the initial conditions. In the 1780s, the United States is a basket case. There's 13 sovereign governments. There's 13 states. They have the ability to raise taxes and print money. We have 13. We have a weak center. Does this remind you of anything? We have a very weak center that can print money, can't raise taxes. It's dependent on the individual states for contributions. They typically don't make them. The consequence, U.S. state, every of the 13 states, they all have debt, and the center has debt. It's going like Eurobonds. They're going at deep discount. The government has no ability to, they're going at 10, 20 cents on the dollar. I'm getting this from a paper written by someone at NYU. So what happens is basically cut through a lot of details, the creditors of the government, for various reasons, they take over and they write a constitution. Here's another thing we can't do. We can't have a coherent trade policy. The British are discriminating us badly in trade. We have 13 different trade policies, and they're playing one off against the other. And then the Constitution of the United States does the following. It gives the federal government the monopoly to levy the one tax that really raises revenues, a tariff in those days. It gives the federal government a monopoly, think of what Chris was saying, a monopoly on the ability to have a trade policy. There's a coordinated trade policy. States can't impose import or export taxes. And then simultaneously, the federal government assumes all the debts of the state debts, and it raises tariffs. First thing Alexander Hamilton and George Washington did is they raised taxes, and they raised them enough to, they're basically spending 85% of U.S. government revenues to service the bonds. And the bonds go from being in deep discount to going at par. And that's how we were born. And we were born with a determined solution to the problem that Europe is facing now. And it was a comprehensive solution done in a certain order. It was all done simultaneously through a process that looks like a miracle. The older you get, the more miraculous, and the more you watch Europe, the more miraculous that you will see. But in terms of, George Stigler said, a war can ravage half a continent and raise no new issues in economic theory. And like Chris said, there's no new issues in economic theory with Europe and the euro. And Alexander Hamilton kind of knew him. The difficult thing is the politics, and I can't help you with that, but maybe someone else can.
I think a message of both Tom's and my research is that the question of whether fiscal or monetary policy is better for reacting to the state of the economy is not a well-posed question. That monetary policy always has fiscal implications, and vice versa. And it's dangerous to think that one of the two kinds of policies can by itself take care of an economic problem if the other policy is off on a different track.
With La Stampa, Italy.
I would like to know if, in order to save the euro, you think that some of the weakest countries should leave the currency?
That's not, okay, so in all due respect, that's not a question that I as an economist can answer. So my little story about the United States, there were some pretty weak currencies there, and none of them left. And, you know, Alexander Hamilton's, so why did Alexander Hamilton want to nationalize the debt? Because he wanted the creditors of those individual states to become supporters of the central government, not the state government. So he was using some game theory. So he saw possibilities like that. So could something like that happen in Europe? Sure. Are there some people who are betting on that? Yes. Are there some people who are hoping for that? Yes. Are there some people who hope the other way? Yeah. So we need some, that's all.
Chris, do you want to add to that answer?
No, Tom's point is that's really a question about how the politics are going to work out. I think it is, one additional point is that the notion that things will get settled in the euro if only some weak countries leave it is unrealistic. That might happen as part of the evolution of the system, but it's in no sense a cure for the problems that face the euro. We also had a long-running argument about a topic that's summarized in a paper of Tom's that I think is called Vector Autoregressions and Advice, something like that.
Yeah.
Which was about the question of how economists can give advice to policymakers, and indeed whether it's really possible for economists to give useful advice to policymakers. Tom, in this paper, set up a straw man that he called me, who he claimed essentially had to conclude there was no way to give any useful advice, whereas his approach provided a way to give useful advice. And I argued back to him over the years that this wasn't true, and that there's lots of room for us to give policymakers advice. I think no economist actually ever comes to the conclusion that he can't give policymakers any advice. But I think that there have been attacks on, quote, modern macroeconomics and, quote, rational expectations by people who would like to believe that highly technical, careful, statistically based macroeconomics led us into our recent great contraction. This is a caricature, and in fact, my view is that technical, careful, statistically based macroeconomics is our hope for getting out of the current difficulties.